Hello and welcome to the Foundational Living Examples and Anecdotes video, Being a Rebel, Not a Revolutionary as a Path to Reform. And for this video, I just want to give some personal examples in my daily life to illustrate how this can be used not in the context of nation states at war and politics and political movements, but instead be used to just understand how being a rebel instead of a revolutionary can help you in your daily life with small things or with cultural issues that you may be engaged with. The first story I want to tell is a story about me recognizing something that was wrong and then becoming the problem because I also became revolutionarily minded. And there's a part of me that still thinks this is funny, but I also know now as an adult that this is kind of dumb and it didn't get anywhere. It didn't help any of us get to a better outcome. So here's the story. When I was in college, I had classes in this one building that was like kind of long, and there was only two doors to the building. There was one at one end and one kind of at the far other end, like this tiny little L curve on it. And so there were double doors there, and then there were double doors down at my end. And it was a two-story building, lots of classrooms in there. And I had a class in this building, and it got out at like a normal time, and everybody exited the building. So when I got out of my class, everybody's exiting. There's lots of students, lots of staff. We're all trying to leave the building, and we're all trying to get out one of these two doors. And it was pretty long, so you've got a whole bunch of people moving towards, one set of doors and a whole bunch of people moving towards the other set of doors. Well, one day as I'm leaving class and exiting the building, I'm walking out, and I push open the door, and I know that there's someone behind me because there's people behind me. It's not like jam-packed, like backpack to backpack, but I know that there's a person behind me. I can sense that they're there or just kind of see them a little bit from the corner of my eye. And as I push open the door, I just sort of hold it open behind me as I go, just kind of putting your arm out and hold the door open. As I kind of hold the door open for a second, I can tell that the person isn't walking with me anymore. And I kind of glance back and I see there's this professor, a woman, standing there kind of back from the door a little bit, and she's not looking at me, but she's looking deadpan ahead, just straight through the open doorway, and she's just stopped, and she's holding some like a briefcase full of stuff in her hands, probably her teaching materials, and she just won't pass through the open doorway. And I was thinking like, what's going on? And I kind of looked, and I was like, okay, well, whatever. And I kind of let go of the door, and I just went about my business. I kind of glanced back, and she stood there until the door closed. And as I walked down the lawn, I noticed she opened the door on her own and walked out. I thought that was a bit strange. Why didn't she just walk through the door? I was just sort of holding the door open for whoever was behind me, right? And do that all the time. As many students go through the doors, we sort of all do that as a common courtesy. You just sort of prop the door open a little bit or kind of hold it open with your hand as you pass. You let your hand slide back a little bit, or you just kind of give it an extra push, prop it open for the next person behind you if you know someone's there. And a couple more times as I leave class, the same thing happened. And I started thinking, this is really weird. And I asked around some of my schoolmates, who was that teacher? And they said, that woman is the professor of the gender studies and women's history courses. And yeah, it clicked. She doesn't want to walk through a door that a man held open for her. But I'm not holding it open for her because I'm a man and she's a woman. I'm not holding it open for her because I think she's weak and can't open the door on her own. I don't even know the times that it happened that she's a woman. I'm just propping it open for whoever's next. But there is sort of a revolutionarily minded approach to academia sometimes that you read, the notion that a man holds the door open for a woman came from like the woman is in a weaker position in society and a weaker physical body perhaps, and she cannot open the door, or it is a gesture to the lower people in society that you are opening the door for them. And there's truth to that. But to take that to the extreme levels, to be revolutionarily minded about it, to not approach it with nuance and detail in the real world is ridiculous. But so was my return behavior. So I started messing with her. I started looking to see if she was also exiting class at the same time I was. And not every day did this happen, but there were a few times that everything lined up perfectly. And the first time I did something, I know that she was behind me, so I held open the door and I just stood there. And she just stood there as well. And I didn't look at her, and she didn't look at me. She just stared out the open door, and I stood there holding it open outside the door, and I just waited. And we waited for like 10 to 15 minutes. Other students just passing through the door, going in, going out, going to their next class, leaving class. And she just stood there until eventually she just turned heel and walked away, all the way down to the other end of the long building to go through the other doors. And then the next time that I got a chance to do this, I took it a step further. So when I noticed she was behind me, I pushed open the door, and while holding it open, I took a rock and I put it under the door to jam the door, to hold it open. And we stood there for a little while, and I waited for her, and she wouldn't go through the door. So then I turned to leave, and I walked across the lawn, and I kept looking back. And for a long time, she was still standing there. I don't know if she was contemplating, like, is this a violation? Now it's the rock that's holding it up and not a man. But she stood there for a while as other people went in and out, and then finally she was gone. I missed exactly what happened, continuing walking the way I was walking and looking back to see, and suddenly she was gone. I'm not sure if she went out and then dipped around the corner and I missed it, or if she turned around and went all the way down to the other door again. But what she did is a sort of silly, revolutionarily minded approach to something that is observable and can be analyzed through our history in our gender relationships between men and women and a power imbalance. Those are all there. It's not that academia doesn't have a point, but the point is not to incorporate it into your life without context in a revolutionarily minded way. But I also was just a revolutionarily minded asshole back to her. And it didn't get anywhere. My actions in return to her revolutionarily minded action didn't lead to any solution. It didn't lead to me or her coming to terms or understanding the other person more. I just sort of ignited the situation and watched it burn a little bit. I later found out that I was going to have to take a class from her, and either A, she was the much bigger person than me and didn't hold it against me, or she didn't recognize me. And in other like-minded cultural battles, people do the same thing. People will say, like, all men are trash. Well, no, not all men are trash. Certain behaviors that men do are toxic and trash. And certain behaviors that men do are in pursuit of their masculinity. And when those two overlap, we have toxic masculinity. Absolutely. But not everything a man does is toxic masculinity. Not everything a man does for masculinity is toxic. Not everything that a man does that's toxic is out of his masculinity, and a woman could also do that, and that could also be toxic. So there are more nuanced ways to approach these situations than men are trash, or these statements like, what have men done for society? Certainly we have done things, and certainly there are good men doing good things now and throughout history. There have also been tons of men doing colonization and rape and murder, and there are statistics that show that men do more violent crimes and yada, yada, yada. We don't deny any of that, but it does not help move the conversation and the cultural battle forward to take a stance like all men are trash. There was this man versus bear, like which one would you rather be trapped with in the wild event that took place online, and men just missed the point completely in women's response. Men took a revolutionarily minded approach to women trying to send a message to men that, hey, men act pretty terrible sometimes, and men do some really awful things, and men blame women for a lot of the things that men do to women. But men didn't respond to that rebelliously. They responded to it revolutionarily. And they started making response videos as if they're making some sort of animal danger tier list. Like, bears are at the top of the tier list. They're an S-class threat. Men are clearly not an S-class threat. How stupid are you to think that a bear isn't going to maul you? That wasn't the point. That's not what women were trying to get across. They were not trying to say that men rank higher in sort of zoo threat tier list. It was just simply trying to convey a concept to men, and men missed it by responding revolutionarily. Some other common cultural issues that you can see people taking things too far are, for instance, the body positivity movement. Body positivity is great. People deserve to feel confident, feel beautiful. People deserve to feel represented or advertised to, which, I mean, that is what a lot of representation is in our capitalistic and materialistic consumer culture. Representation kind of just means being advertised to, but hey, you deserve that right just like anyone. And representation and exposure, those things are important. And being able to have a more expanded view of beauty and self-expression is also important, as so many different groups of men and women have been ostracized out of what has been traditionally accepted as like masculine or feminine or beautiful or handsome or whatever. But there are moments when it goes too far and it alienates people to supporting those movements at the most basic level, where we can say, yeah, bullying is not right. Yeah, we don't need to shame these people and be mean to these people. We don't need to try to cut these people down. But saying 300 pounds fit and healthy, well, that's just not true. And furthermore, it isn't useful to the message of having some body positivity. Saying that obese is a slur and not a medical diagnosis or a medical term that refers to a very specific condition is not the actual point and benefit of body positivity. And it is getting caught up too much in this large movement and trying to replace wholesale an existing ideology that had flaws and problems because people were alienated from a sense of personal expression or beauty or representation, etc. But trying to then take this other group of concepts wholesale and just say, this is the new group. This is the new thing that has to replace all of the old things. That doesn't work very well. And there are lots of those things that are flaws or misconceptions or just things that are flat out wrong that when people try to push them, it makes the argumentation for the good change that does need to happen, it makes that worse. It makes it less supported and less heard. Those points become silent in the shouting and the fervor of these sort of ridiculous revolutionarily minded statements. The last example I want to give is an example that further illustrates my 3 ways of disproving that the ends justify the means is never the right course of action. And I want to talk about something that's going on in China right now and historically. So years ago, they had this one-child policy. Probably many of you have heard of that. But people could only have one child. And they integrated this policy because they were trying to curb the population growth because they thought that the country was inflating way too much. And so they thought, we're going to go to a one-child policy, and that will be the solution. It was quite authoritarian, and as historians and pretty much any person can tell you, it really wasn't a one-child policy law. It was a illegal to be poor policy because you could pay money to have a second kid. And rich people did it all over China. They wanted more kids because more kids meant more heirs to create more family wealth and to keep more wealth in the family for the generations that support each other, because in their system, generations support each other more than in the US. And so rich families just got to have more kids and pay the fine, and poor families could not. There were some exceptions for extreme rural workers and farmers. They could have more kids because it was basically like having a farmhand, extra labor on the farm. But for poor people, they couldn't have any more kids. They couldn't pay for it. And there were all sorts of ways that people tried to get around this by saying that, like, oh, it was their sister or their brother or someone else in the village, someone else in the town or the city that had the kid. They would try to say that their kid was someone else's, etc. So basically, this law that was meant to curb the population growth and come to a balanced point wasn't actually a law that meant you can only have one child. It was basically just a law that you couldn't be poor. If you were rich, you can still do whatever you want. And if you're poor, you're going to be criminalized. And people had to pay fines and even go to jail because they had extra kids. And what was the actual end? Did they arrive at a balanced population where they got the outcome they wanted? No. Right now in China, they have a huge population deficit, and they have low birth rate, and they are scrambling like the US is, but even worse here, to increase the population rate, increase the birth rate now. So now what the government is doing is trying to implement in certain cities in the public sector laws that say if you're a woman and you work in a public sector job, you have to have 1 or 2 or 3 kids. And if you don't, you are going to be penalized and you are going to have your public sector benefits revoked. And in China right now, private sector jobs is where the money is at. Still, for a lot of people very poor, there's a lot of scams and gray money area there, but private sector is where people go for money. Public sector, people do not go for money. They go for stability, which a lot of the young people is arguing is deteriorating more and more now, but they go for the benefits, for the housing loans, car loans, pension and retirement and medical insurance and things like that. And those benefits are going to start being revoked from women if they do not have 1 or 2 or 3 kids. And many young women in China right now have been speaking out against this. They are saying that this is the pattern the government does. When they want to test a policy, they put it in the public sector in a few places and they test how it works. Then, if it kind of works, what they do is they spread that to more public sectors, more cities and provinces, and then they spread it to the general population. And so this is going to be their new ends justify the means tactic if they truly want to implement this. And this is another ridiculous method because lots of young women are speaking out saying we are not baby making machines. We do not want to do this. You are not compensating enough. The economy is not good, and we don't feel we can have kids in this economy, and we do not want to comply with this. And a lot of young women are getting their socials, they're streaming their podcasts, etc., all taken down. They're getting all their content blocked and deleted because they are speaking out and saying, we do not want to be baby making machines. This is not a good method to arrive at the ends that you want to arrive at. So here is another revolutionarily minded approach that they are taking that they might have to back off of or they might continue to implement. And it's probably not going to get where they want it to go. And even if it does, they can always ask the question, could we have done this without subjugating women and maybe men? Maybe they'll extend it to the men that work in public sector jobs, married to women that are not having kids. Or just if you're not getting married by a certain age in a public sector job and having kids as a man or woman, you're going to be penalized or have your public sector benefits revoked. If those things happen, those would be devastating. Ends justify the means attempts at correcting their social security imbalance. So previously, they tried to arrive there with the one-child policy, and it failed completely, so the ends justify the means does not work in that way. The second way, they are now trying to get there by saying women are baby-making machines that are going to be required to have 1, 2, or 3 kids. And either what's going to happen is they get there, and they, of course, could have done it better, or they don't get there at all, and women and something bad in the country erupts, protest. Women have a huge thing about it. Women flee, or women just refuse to get married. Every time the government tries to come out with a new stipulation, maybe women fight against it or try to disregard it, and they never get there. So ends justify the means is going to fail again. This sort of revolutionarily minded approach to something is not going to work. And there might be lots of other examples that you can think of, simple things in the culture war where people bicker and feud and kind of make outrageous statements or take things too far, and it alienates and pushes that person away instead of bringing them closer to have them understand you or say, yeah, I get it. I get what you're saying and that's important. I just think it's a little bit more like this. Or, yeah, that's important, but how about we also try to incorporate this? If you can think of any other examples that you want to put in the comments, things you see in your life, maybe where you were able to stop looking at a certain issue with such a wholesale supplanting kind of way and look at it in a more pinpointed and spontaneous and rebellious way, put that in the comments. And thanks for watching. I hope integrating this into your life can kind of bring a better sense of peace or balance, less tumultuous highs and lows, and less incendiary combat and interaction with other people in the disagreement spaces that we often find ourselves.